Hey guys, Eric here. Welcome to Rant and Review. In this video, we're going to be talking about The Boys, Season 4, Episode 4, otherwise titled Wisdom of the Ages. So careful for spoilers if you're not caught up with The Boys this season. You've been warned. Let's get into it. I actually took notes this week. All of y'all kept yelling at me, take notes, take notes. So I finally took notes. I have some stuff over here, some bullet points to guide my rant and review a little bit better, to make it a bit more cohesive. Look, I'm listening. I'm paying attention, okay? So we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. I hope YouTube doesn't hit this video. I'm going to be very careful about what I say when it comes to The Boys, because YouTube loves to be like, this video isn't suitable. It's not suitable. Request review, still not suitable. So I'm going to try and be careful, but still get my point across. Let's talk about this episode. All right, here's what we have this week. Homelander returns back to where it all started, the lab where he was raised and tormented at. Huie tries to find a way to save his dad, even if it means working with A-Train. Firecracker and Starlight light up with shenanigans. Frenchie is in a no-win scenario with Colin. It's crazy. Like, how are you going to sleep with someone when you took a hit out on their family? Like, I don't know. This entire week's episode was a messy dumpster fire in the best way possible. Before we start talking about all that, I do want to give a shout out to all of the subscribers, all of you folks that have been around for a very long time. Thank you so much. All of my Team Airrick members and all of the new subscribers. You guys are amazing. I'm seeing a lot of interaction and engagement with my content. So you guys are loving these rant reviews. So make sure you're leaving a like on the video, you're leaving a comment. And if you're seeing this and you're like, oh, I like this guy's videos, maybe you should subscribe. Maybe you should just subscribe to the channel and become a part of the Airrickverse now. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about in detail from this episode is the stuff with John. Excuse me, I mean Homelander. Did not mean to call him John. So he's heading back to this lab where he was held at, tormented. I'm trying to avoid another word, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Treated very poorly by a bunch of these lab workers. And he brings cake with him. And with Homelander, I know there's always some kind of ulterior motive, but when he set the cake down, first of all, it made me really hungry. I wanted cake when I saw that, but he set the cake down and I'm feeling like, okay, there's got to be something in the cake. It's going to be like poop. It's going to be body parts. It's going to be something really gross. It reminded me of like Halloween when your parents tell you like, oh, check your candy to make sure there's nothing in it. Like, that's what I was thinking. And so I prepared for that. Like, I literally sat back and I'm like, it's going to be something really bad. And then it's not, it's just cake. I'm like, okay, all right, it's just regular cake. But that doesn't mean he wasn't thinking about baking something. He was thinking about baking people in this lab. Like, the very first crazy wild thing that happens is he has this guy that he remembers that used to put him in like this room that was like this furnace that tried to like test him for his durability because he's like Superman. He's like, no, I felt that hurt. And why don't you get in there now? And at that point, you realize that this is just going to be a big game for Homelander. He's going to be very sadistic, and we're going to watch him go through people in this lab. Like, I'm like, okay, this is it. It wasn't the cake. The cake was the misdirect. He's going to be doing some stuff here in the lab. So he does that. He puts the guy in that room and doesn't go well. Then he has this guy that I don't remember his name, one of the other lab guys, who keeps calling him John. But he had another nickname for him, which was Squirt. And I'm like, okay, what is the gross thing that is going to connect with that nickname? And it ends up, it's pretty bad. I can't even really talk about it here on YouTube, but he was watching him while he was locked in a room, pulling a DSP, basically. So then he like forces this guy to do a DSP, like some humiliation fetish gig stuff. I can't talk about it here. Like, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't think anybody really wants me to, but I can't. Anyway, but he's like, wants to make this guy do this in front of like the whole lab, and it's just a super uncomfortable thing. And you're like, he's just going to kill the guy anyway. Like, he's just going to do that. There's no way that he's going to make him do all this stuff and then just let him walk out of here. That's definitely not going to happen. And we're right. So he ends up doing that because the head of the lab, this older lady, even though I took notes, I don't think I caught her name, but she's an older lady. She comes in, she tells Homelander like, oh, finish it, put him out of his misery stuff. So he does. But, even with her having some sort of like verbal, I don't want to say control, but persuasion over Homelander, we knew that this was not good for anybody else in this lab. Nobody was walking out of this place alive. And so he ends up locking her in a room that he was locked in and unaliving everybody else in the lab, and then making her sit there while he goes up in the elevator, covered in blood, which we're not going to show that picture here. I don't know if that would get flagged by YouTube. The Boys is like a minefield for YouTube ad suitability. So I'm trying my best to play by their rules. But he goes up in the elevator and you see him covering all this stuff, and she's locked up in the room with all the people that he's unalived. And I have to say, if you're a fan of Homelander at his most sadistic, this was the episode for you. This was probably the most visually wild part of the episode. We have a lot of other things to talk about, but this one was the one where if you're looking for this, for that shock factor, for that gross out stuff, this is going to get you. There's another scene later in the episode that's pretty gross, but this was the one that really gets you. And this has people wondering if Homelander is like the best villain that's ever been in live action superhero media. I don't know if I can answer that question this early. We still have this season and next season to go. They could drop the ball and he could end up being awful, but I don't know right now. There's still other villains that I think are more iconic. There are other villains that I think are better villain characters than Homelander, but Homelander resonates with so many people because he's sort of like this amalgamation of all of the things that, like in terms of politics, that people find to be repulsive. Like I even people who might be on the side of like the conservative space, they're probably going to find a lot of what Homelander does to be sort of repulsive. I think he resonates with a lot of people. I don't know. Do you connect with Homelander? I hate to even ask this question. If you're watching this video right now, do you have a connection with Homelander as a character and you somehow side with anything he's ever done? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. I think he exemplifies like everything that everyone should rally against, but maybe some of y'all do. I'm not saying I'm not going to judge you, but you can definitely leave it in the comments below. I want to talk briefly about the storyline with Huie and his father and his mom and A-Train and Kimiko and Shining Light and all of that. So I made it very clear last week when I was talking about the first 3 episodes, the stuff with Huie wasn't really my favorite, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's well acted. It's emotional, but it sort of gets buried a lot in the other stuff that's happening because the show is quite polarizing. And this story is much more emotionally charged. And I can resonate with it. Look, I have had to deal with the loss of so many family members in the last 10 years that I get it. Like what he's standing there dealing with his father. I can emotionally connect with that because I've been in that moment. And for me, that makes the story much more richer. But I think everybody could sort of imagine what it's like to like, even if you haven't, how hard it would be to lose a parent if you are close with your parents. So I get that. And if you're not, you could just insert any person in your life that means something to you. And you could see why he wants to save his dad. But he wants to do it with V. He wants to make a deal with A-Train, basically forgive him for everything he's ever done, which I'm like, okay, I don't know if I could do that even under these circumstances. But it seems like a good deal for A-Train because he's had to deal with this hanging over his head since this first season. So for him to have, Huie say, "Oh, I'll forgive you for everything," and shake his hand or whatever, and then let it go for this V, why not? Now there was a situation where the V was locked away in Homelander's office. And of course, when A-Train went to go get it, Ashley was there, and that was a whole awkward situation. But it seems like now they both sort of have something on each other. But now Ashley knows that A-Train is not fully into the 7, and she's been on the outs. So we're going to see if she's going to eventually use that to get back in good graces with Homelander, because she's kind of Weasley. So I could see her totally doing that, but I'm not totally sure. Anyway, Butcher, we'll talk about him more in a second, but he catches Huie doing this with A-Train and basically gives Huie some good advice about this. He's like, you shouldn't do this. But not being totally honest with Huie about everything that's happening, because Butcher never is. That's kind of is what's frustrating about his character, is that you want to sort of root for him 100% because he does seem to be the kind of guy that wants all of this soup shit to go away. But he's also very, very, very like, he lies a lot. He keeps information from people. He told, Ryan that he's like, "I'm not a good person." So it's really hard to even side with him. I'll be honest. It's hard to side with anybody on the Boys, even Starlight. And I know people, when I was live streaming, I said like, who is the best character? Like Starlight. I'm like, you can't even side with her 100% most of the time. But, Huie with Kimiko, which by the way, scene with Kimiko telling him that maybe he should just let his dad go, 100% like teared up on that one. And even though Kimiko's not getting a lot this season in terms of story so far, we're 4 episodes in, it's not a ton. The stuff with the Shining Light, seems really interesting. And I'm totally curious to see what's going to happen with all that. If we get any more of that, like heavily throughout the rest of the season, I'm not totally sure. But her being a nonverbal character and being able to convey that emotion to Huie, I totally get it. I appreciate it. It's a vibe. I like it. So the storyline's good. Again, more soft-spoken than the rest of the stuff. But Huie decides not to use V on his dad. But somebody decides to use V on his dad, and I'm not sure who that is. That's one of the big cliffhangers for the episode. So we have to figure out who it is that is trying to use V on his father to bring him back, because now he's back. All right, so let's talk about the insanity of the roller coaster we're on with Butcher and Mother's Milk. One day they're best friends tagging each other on social media. The next day they're unfollowing each other and posting vague stories about drama online. Just kidding, but it does feel like that. So we found out last week that Mother's Milk wanted to kick Butcher out for a while. He finally decides to do it. He's like, you're out. You're no longer part of the boys. And then this week he decides to bring him back in again. And so again, roller coaster ride, but he doesn't know, and a lot of people don't know, that Butcher is seeing visions and getting information and support from these visions. And so we're not totally sure what's going on there, but something is crawling around under his skin, and it's super creepy. And the whole time I'm like, well, what could this possibly be? Because we know that he's not doing Temp V, so he doesn't have like Homelander powers anymore. But there's definitely something happening to him. And I thought, what if it's like a symbiote storyline? Because it's giving me like Venom vibes. And I'm not saying that it's like some alien symbiote inside of him, but what if it's like the boys' version of what that would be because of V? Maybe it's some sort of like psychic thing inside of his head. I don't know. Like, it feels very symbiotic to me. And the reason why is when Ezekiel is going after Frenchie, when they're at the, it wasn't a convention, but the stage show with like Firecracker, we'll talk about that in a second. He sort of blacks out and then defeats Ezekiel in a very graphic way, but doesn't really remember doing it. Doesn't remember what happened. And that gives me symbiote vibes. It gives me some kind of like Incredible Hulk type thing. So something is definitely going on inside of Butcher. And my theory is it's going to be symbiotic, and that's somehow influencing what he's doing. And I think it's only going to get worse over this season. But we may not get an answer for that until next season, because ultimately, whatever is happening to Butcher is going to lead up to a big finale battle with Homelander. Instead of it being like Superman versus Superman, it's going to be like some symbiotic creature with Butcher facing off against Superman. And I don't know, maybe parasitic type thing, like Parasite from DC. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't, like I said, I didn't read a lot of the boys' comics. I read some of the early issues, but I thought the show was better than the comics, so I kind of stopped reading the comics and just paid attention to the show. But I don't think, at least in my recollection, that there's anything about this happening with Butcher in the comics, unless there is, and I'm just totally lost on it. But if you have any idea on what you think is happening with Butcher, leave it in the comments below. I would love to hear other fan theories on what's happening. All right, so let's talk about this Frenchie and Colin situation. All of it. I want to talk about all of it. So there seems to be an issue with a lot of people that Frenchie is in a relationship with another man because of the stuff that happened with Kamiko. And I've been seeing the memes going around. I'm online. I see them where they're like, how could he give up her for this guy? Like, it's so frustrating, because that is not how it works. That's not how things work. Like, you cannot say, oh, well, this person is more attractive to me, so I don't understand why that person doesn't want to be with A instead of B. Like, that's not how the world works. We also don't know what's going on with Frenchie's sexuality. We don't know if he's gay and just never really talked about it, if he's bisexual, if he's pansexual. We don't know anything. I don't think they've explicitly stated it. I was watching the episode waiting for some sort of confirmation. There was nothing. So we don't know. We have no idea what's happening with him. But we do know that he at least seems to really give a shit about Colin. But this is a no-win scenario for him. And it's weird. It's really weird, because even though they fast-tracked it, and I was telling Darth Bunyan last week when we were streaming together for our rant and review then, that for me, it seemed like they went too quickly into this relationship. I wanted to see more of the slow burn leading up into the relationship, but that's not what we got. We just jumped right into it. And now I see why, because number one, I don't see any way this relationship continues. I don't think it's possible. And if it does, it's probably one of the most fucked up relationships I've seen on TV. Let me explain why. He is having a romantic relationship with the person whose family he took a hit out on. There's no way that is healthy for either of them in this fictional world where this whole thing is just batshit crazy anyway. But like trying to rationalize that, like Colin lost his family. Now he's in a relationship with the person who offed all of them and then lied to him about it. And he met in rehab, and that person is still doing things that he's not supposed to be doing because he was in rehab. So he's lied to him about multiple things now. And then he tries to come clean because clearly Frenchie cannot live with what he's done, which means at least to some degree, he's feeling the pain of that to the point where he wants to be honest. But he did it. And even if Colin were to forgive him, this is not healthy for the two of them. It's not. I'm sure there's a lot of nice guys out there for Colin that didn't do what Frenchie did to him. And I don't think Frenchie should be doing this stuff with Colin because it's very creepy for the person who did that to his family to also be in a relationship with him. Trying to unpack all of this is just, it's almost impossible for me. And I want to be Team Frenchie, but when all of the stuff happened where Colin went off on him, and I'm not condoning any kind of like physical violence stuff like that, but I could not sit there and be like Team Frenchie in that moment because Colin acted out of rage because of what happened. And I don't know how I'd rationalize it as a person. I don't know. I have no clue. But to be straight up, all jokes aside, this is not a healthy relationship. It's not healthy for either one of them. And I just, what's going to happen here? What's the possible outcome of this? I can't imagine it's going to be good. So now I want to talk about this Starlight and Firecracker stuff because what is this situation? What do we have going on here? Firecracker and Vought set up a live broadcast outside of the mission where Starlight works and then proceeds to air out all of Starlight's dirty laundry out to the public. She brings in Ezekiel, who was the pastor for Starlight when she was younger. She talks about Starlight seeking out contortion. There's a word that rhymes with contortion, starts with an A because of YouTube. Starlight needing assistance with a pregnancy situation. Talks about her blinding someone when she was trying to save them. And then we find out that Firecracker is a whole ass predator. And I'm not talking about the kind in the jungle who can turn invisible and hunt aliens. I'm talking about the kind you find in church. Those kinds of predators. And then I'm like, why is the internet not talking about this? Like, I felt like so many people were just not talking about it. And look, I get it. There was a lot of stuff that happened in this episode. But, and then she goes on to have Ezekiel, like she admits to it, and then has Ezekiel, like, basically walk through, like, a path of forgiveness for her, the fake-ass pastor stuff. And then I feel like I couldn't take a breath. I'm like, what is happening? And then this little duet with the Deep. And then Starlight straight up assaults Firecracker, which I'm sure is the kind of energy a lot of fans were waiting for. And it was all over the internet and the boys universe, which was Sage's plan all along. More on that in a second. But, you know, I have to say, I feel like, and I talked about this last week, satire is kind of lost on the show. Honestly, it feels like it's copy and paste of what's actually happening right now in the real world. And I talked about this on my review. That the boys used to feel like a crystal ball of what could possibly happen. It was like predicting extremes. But now it's just sort of following them. It's following them, and it's forced the show to sort of up the gore, the bodily harm, political radicalization. All of that's really been amped up because of the fact that we've reached a place in our real world where the ridiculous stuff that would have worked on the boys isn't ridiculous enough. So they have to get even further with that. It's quite interesting. But yeah, so now we have Starlight versus Firecracker, and this is what Sage planned all along, which leads me up to my last part of the review here. Let's talk about this. All right, when it comes to Sister Sage, one of my theories that I talked about last week was I believe that she is trying to destroy the Seven from the inside, and I feel like that was confirmed in this episode. I feel like it's going down that path. I'm really happy about that. because she seemed really excited that her plan with Firecracker and Starlight worked. She's not a fan of Firecracker, even though Firecracker was like, oh, I thought you were one of these uppity people or whatever. And, you know, she played along with it. But clearly she doesn't like Firecracker. So this tells me that there is some other plan going on. Now, whether that plan ends with the destruction of the Seven or it ends with a lot of soups being disavowed, like no more heroes flying around, none of that stuff, because she didn't like the costume. She doesn't want to wear a suit. She doesn't want to be part of a team. It seems like she might have a bigger plan than just stopping the Seven. But I do believe that is the big thing. She wants to end Vought and end the Seven because of reasons, I guess. We also find out that she has this issue where she can't stop thinking, and her brain, if it gets damaged, it just regrows and continues to work that way. So we find out that's what that little thing sitting on the nightstand last week was a needle for lobotomies. And so she has to get the Deep to do that for her so that she can not think for a moment, because she's always thinking. It was really gross. I couldn't watch that scene. That was like next to the Homelander stuff. That was pretty much like, I had to look away. Honestly, I had to look away because of the way they did it. However, this does explain why she was so into the Deep last week. So I don't know if it's real or not. Like if she's really, really into him, or if it's just another ploy for her to get what she wants, because he is kind of dumb. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is another one of her tricks. I don't know. Anyway, let me give my score for this episode. So I'm going to give this week's episode an 8 out of 10. I almost give it a 7, but as I'm sitting here, I'm like, no, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good episode. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think the show is really moving along quite well. Let me make sure I got all my notes over here. So yeah, I said my scoring, if you love an extremely sadistic Homelander, and you wanted some questions answered about Sage and Frenchie, this would have been the episode for you. If you wanted to see Firecracker get her ass kicked, this was the episode for you. So there's a lot of stuff that happened. Also, I want to briefly mention that anyone who thought that The Boys was apolitical after season 1, what show were you watching? Genuine question. What show were you watching where you thought The Boys was going to be apolitical? You weren't watching the same show that I was. So let me know if you're one of the people that thought The Boys was supposed to be apolitical, because that was never in the cards for the show. Are you enjoying this season? Let me know. Make sure you subscribe to get more content like this. Leave a like on this video and leave a comment down below. The Boys season 4 is on fire. Viewership is up 21% from last season. So doing something right. Maybe it's all the DEI.